biopic has been a big part of film pretty much since the beginning of the medium. It's a perfect way to tell the story of someone's life while also studying their character and basically breaking down their humanity. As a musician myself and just a huge music fan, music biopics have always been what I've gravitated to more. They can be very problematic, sometimes feeling directionless and completely changing key parts of history to emotionally manipulate its audience. For example, Bohemian Rhapsody, which is one of the worst biopics I've ever seen, and sometimes they can be gripping, powerful, and inspire creators to follow their dreams. I own a few of these films, including Control, the incredible film about Ian Curtis, as well as the Doors movie, both of which I plan to discuss in the future, but for now let's take a look at probably the most acclaimed biopic ever made, Amadeus. I admittedly have owned this film for years, but never got around to watching it. I was sure I would enjoy it, but I just never got around to it, until I decided that for this series I was going to try and watch everything I owned but hadn't watched before, so it didn't just carry on gathering dust. And yeah, this film is quite possibly the best biopic I've ever seen. The film was adapted from a play written by Peter Shaffer and directed by Milos Forman, director of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Man of the Moon, both two of my favourite movies ever made. The film is a fictionalised biography of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, told from the perspective of his rival Antonio Salieri. Salieri spends his whole life praying to God for the chance to compose music for a living, which leads him to becoming the emperor's court composer. However, after seeing the incredible talent of Mozart, he starts to believe that God intentionally sent Mozart down to take Salieri's place and become the greatest composer who ever lived. Enraged by this, Salieri decides to sabotage Mozart by slowly descending him into a mad, alcoholic-dependent state, which later ends in his death. The story of the film is told from the perspective of an aging Salieri who is confiding in a mental hospital. He tells the story of his experiences with Mozart to a priest as he confesses to murdering him. That is the plot in its most basic iteration. Much more happens in the film to keep it interesting. I don't really know where to start with this movie. In an age where MTV had just become the biggest thing in the world and everything was incredibly bright and neon, to release a period piece about a classical composer with the entire soundtrack being based off his music, alongside a 2.5-hour runtime, no big name actors and no action, nudity or anything crass, was an incredibly risky move. But it is a film that succeeds in every single department. Since very little information about who Mozart actually was is out there, the filmmakers, along with actor Tom Hulce, could create a character completely from scratch. There's been a lot of information to come out in the years afterwards which conflicts some of the character's traits in this film, including his wild party lifestyle, but there's never a point in the film where I felt like either thing seemed completely unbelievable or information was so obviously false that it took me out of the film, something I can't say for Bohemian Rhapsody. In fact, throughout the film there was never a point where I wondered whether any of the events actually happened, because I was so incredibly engrossed into the film that I felt like I was watching the truth. This is in part due to Shaffer's incredible script, but also due to the performances from the actors. Neither F. Murray Abraham or Tom Hulce have ever done a performance in any film quite as incredible as this before or since, to the point where you feel like they were kind of born to play these roles. Both actors give two of the best performances I think I've ever seen. Abraham plays this incredibly tortured and conflicted man who believes that God is playing a cruel trick on him. The struggles with faith that Abraham portrays lead to this incredibly gripping character, especially in the scenes of him as an older man, which are beautifully written. There are many lines of dialogue in these scenes that have quickly become some of my favourite lines in any movie. Hulce plays a character in every way completely the opposite. He begins the movie with a huge ego, no fear for anything, and completely aware that he has an incredible gift that comes to him incredibly easily. I've seen very few films that manage to depict the artistic creative process in such a realistic way. There were many points in the film, for example the marriage of Figaro scene, or the scene where Salieri notates for him, where I completely related to his creative process. As the film progresses and he descends into madness, the character becomes less of a pompous douche and turns into an incredibly layered, fascinating character that makes you feel such deep emotion. His performance and the way the character of Mozart is written are both pitch perfect and help create this incredibly unique and interesting character study. The look of the film is also absolutely stunning. The film is shot using natural light, which for those who don't know is where the only lighting in the film is whatever lighting is in the rooms or outside of where they're shooting. There is no additional lighting added to change the film. I have always loved natural lighting in films, and I think this film is one of the best displays of it ever, creating this extreme atmosphere that beautifully paints the pictures of the film's period. You never feel like you're watching actors on a set dressed in big wigs and funny dresses. You feel like you're watching real people that are really in the 1700s. The lighting as well as the absolutely gorgeous sets help sustain the sense of disbelief perfectly. Much of the film was shot on location in Prague, and they were even able to shoot in the Count Nostitz theatre where Mozart's Don Giovanni actually premiered 2 centuries prior. The fact they got to use the real thing for the film makes it feel much more real than if they created it all on a soundstage. Of course, we can't talk about this movie without talking about its real main character, the music. Mozart's music beautifully runs throughout this movie, creating an incredible mood and atmosphere. The music they chose perfectly sum up Mozart's very long career, and the film is filled with his most iconic and fantastic pieces. I will admit that going into the film I had very little knowledge of his music past what I'd heard in other films or what we'd had to listen to and break down at university. But this film has made me want to go down this huge rabbit hole and listen to as much of his music as possible. I especially want to hear all those scat songs he wrote like Lick Me in the Arse. There is no question about the fact that Amadeus is a masterpiece and one of the greatest movies ever made. If you haven't seen it, I cannot recommend it more. Despite the fact it's 2.5 hours long, it's one of the most gripping and enjoyable 2.5 hours you'll ever have in your life watching a film.